Good morning. Good morning. Good morning as we gather. What a morning we have already had, and what a morning and day we get to continue to have. I am so grateful and excited about this next session that we are getting ready to have. As you all know, the theme of our conference has been to set the captives free, and looking at the visions and the dreams of abolitionisms. And so I'm so grateful that Niall preached for us in the way that he did, and that Derecka is also here to offer us her voice and her words and her dreams. So I wanted to call us to attention, to order, to dive in to this and to continue to do this work. Judge Griffin, I want to invite you to introduce our speaker.
Good morning, family. Good morning. I am glad to be with you and glad to take this invitation to introduce a rock star. When you get to the point in your journey that I have reached at age 70, you have more days behind you than days ahead of you, and you wonder about the days and years after you leave the planet and this work, and you wonder how it's going to go. And what you do is you look and see who's coming up the road. Who's coming up the road? And if you look behind you and you see people coming up the road who look like they can not only travel the road, but widen the road, you don't feel bad stepping off the path. That is the blessing we have now in the keynote speaker. Part of the reason why we're in the Alliance is for moments like this, when we hear and see people coming up the road. Now, I'm going to do what I like to do. I want you to check out this. I haven't read it, just bought it. I told Derecka Purnell I would not ask her to autograph it before anybody else, because I didn't want to exercise male privilege and old people's privilege. But I'm gonna get your autograph. You have read her bio, but as I told her, I blessed February 2020 because that is when Derecka Purnell became a regular Guardian columnist. And I read her. She informs the world about race, what we call the criminal legal system. I call it the criminal punishment system because it's never been a criminal justice system. It is working exactly the way it was planned, and the idea is to abolish it. I thank God for your work, and we thank God for your presence. There is a term that's used in a certain generation called bless the mic. I'm going to ask you to repeat after me. Sister Derecka, come bless the mic. Come bless the mic, sister.
Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. And in my grave and be home with my Lord and be free. Oh, liberation, oh, abolition, oh, freedom over me. And before I'd be a slave, I'd be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Wow, I'm happy I wasn't asked to sing because that would not be blessing the mic. Actually, it would be cursing the mic. And so I thank you so much for that wonderful selection. Thank you for that just beautiful introduction to know that we're all on this shared road together. Thank you so much to Elijah for the invitation. I told you, completely enamored by what I've heard so far today, and I'm excited to continue to learn more. Thank you to Reverend Dr. Niall Ford. It is, I don't even know what to say. You know, I get to see Niall at 4 o'clock in the morning walking around practicing his sermon, but he doesn't let me hear it. And so sitting here right now, just being like, that's what you were working on for weeks, and I had to wait this whole time. So thank you so much for being a dear friend to me, a teacher, and a spiritual leader. I really am grateful for that. And thank you to all of you who decided to be here in Atlanta today, doing really, really important work that involves our spirituality and our calls for justice. And so I'm going to take a quick opportunity just to pray. The Baptist church that I belonged to for years did not permit women to pray in the pulpit. And so this would be the first time I would be praying in a church, in the pulpit, as a woman. Close your eyes if you can. God, thank you so much for allowing us to gather today. Thank you so much for calling us to do this work. And even though when it's confusing and tiring and reinvigorating, and we're on Zoom calls and phone calls and text threads trying to plan and take care of logistics, we know that the work and labor that we all put into this is ultimately for your glory. So I pray that this message, our conversations, and our lessons today be in that tradition for your glory. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Amen. Wow. Most important thing I have to say is I'm also never going after Niall again, ever. It's not fair. I want to introduce you to two special people in my life. They're my kids, Juice and Garvey. I have a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old, and they are my tiny, broke best friends, as children tend to be. Juice is an Aquarius, and he's very proud of that. It means he's very competitive, and his trash talk far exceeds his skill sometimes. And so we have lots of fun and energetic conversations, and every day when I pick them up from school, how's school today? What did you learn? Who do you like? They're on this crush thing right now. But one day, when I picked Juice up from school, he was really quiet. I said, baby, what's wrong? What's happening? Where's the Aquarian energy? Garvey, my youngest, is a Scorpio, so he was just talking a lot. And so Juice says, Mommy, can police kill kids? And I said, what did you just say? Can police kill kids? And I personally don't love conversations around the talk, right? Because what it often does is sensationalizes the conversation that usually Black parents have to have with usually their Black children about how to keep themselves alive as they drive or as they play or as they walk. Right. And so it frustrates me that that burden is often on parents of color of teaching their children how to not get killed, instead of on white families, our communities, of teaching people not to be violent. Yeah. And so the inversion makes me so angry, and so I had not actually been preparing to have any sorts of conversations with my children about that. But they know my work. They know what I do. You know, they're at the age where you think that having a website alone is like, oh, you're famous because you have a website. And I'm like, no, I pay Squarespace like $12 a month. Like, that's why I have a website. And so we talk about abolition, we talk about the world. They have broad, beautiful analyses. I'll give you another quick story. One day, Garvey, my 6-year-old, loses his toothbrush in our small apartment. I don't know how you lose a toothbrush in an apartment, but he lost it. So we run to the grocery store, and there's a Batman toothbrush for sale for $1.50. And I'm like, okay, let's get the Batman toothbrush. And Garvey goes, no, mommy, Batman's a capitalist. We cannot get the Batman toothbrush. I mean, which is true. Batman is kind of a capitalist and a little bit of a fascist. So these are the conversations we have in my house. And so when Juice asks, mommy, can police kill people? I was caught off guard. In many ways, he felt betrayed. When I said, well, what happened? Where is this coming from? He goes, well, we talked about it in my class today. My teacher was talking to a group of us, and she told us about Tamir Rice. And he was only 12 years old, and I'm 9. Why didn't you tell me that police could kill kids? So I don't know if it was bravery or out of cowardice. I wanted to know, how did that make him feel? What did he think? What did he consider? Because in one sense, it is true, right? The police have the power, they technically have the capacity to take the life of a child. And he was frustrated that I had not shared the full scope of policing powers with him. Yeah. So you're navigating, well, it's probably unlikely that it'll happen to you. And I don't want to just say no, because now you have evidence, because there is a body that was in a park, and the soul that animated that body is no more. Yeah. And so he started crying, and then I started crying, and I started apologizing for not telling him. I started apologizing for that is the case. And I continued to cry and tell him, well, baby, there's so many people fighting to make sure that that won't happen anymore. There's so many people who didn't even know until a few years ago that very fact. And the people that knew probably thought it was an anomaly, right? They didn't think or know about Aiyana Stanley Jones or Laquan McDonald or Michael Brown, who was only 18 himself. They had not known, but now people are learning, they're knowing, they're waking up. So then he asked me if he was going to die. I said, Juice, baby, you're gonna live a long life, God willing. We are praying to not make sure that you come into these dangerous encounters. And what's so sad is because of the kind of child he is, and this is what's so messed up about disparities, it makes you think, well, my child, someone who's the child of now a Harvard lawyer, Harvard-trained lawyer, who I work at Columbia University, I'm organizing with Dream Defenders, he's actually less likely to be killed by police because he's in a less precarious situation, right? So we know that any moment, any one of us, well, not any one of you, but lots of other people could be pulled over, could be in an encounter, but we know police disproportionately kill people who are disabled. killed, right? And people who are poor, overwhelmingly people who are poor. And so when Niall is talking about the bad apples, let's talk about what the best apples do. The ripest apples on the tree overwhelmingly surveil and harass people who are living and who are struggling because of exploitation in this country. People who have been locked out of the labor market and the economy. So when we see George Floyd and everyone's devastated because we're watching Derek show his knee and his back for 9 minutes, somehow it obscures the broader story that George Floyd, the police were called on him initially because he was surviving on a counterfeit $20 bill, right? 10 million arrests every single year that the police do. The people who are rearrested more than once, guess what their incomes are? Less than $10,000, right? You can't reform that. No. That's the system working, as Judge Gifford told us. And so then later that night, we did our routine, Juice Garvey and I. We have a prayer handshake that Niall makes fun of us. He says it's way too long. Like we hug, we dap, we literally do rock, paper, scissors. We do like a black power fist at the end. It's a whole elaborate scheme, but it's our like prayer handshake, right? And then they pray. So Juice starts praying, and Juice, again, he's competitive, so he wants his prayers and his conversations with God to be like, okay, God, I'm about to go off on this prayer. But that night, he was much more solemn, as you can imagine. His little 9-year-old heart had been weighed with the news of Tamir's Wright's passing. That happened in 2014, and it's 2023, if you can believe that, right? So he goes, dear God, thank you so much for this day. Thank you so much for our lives. Thank you so much for our love and my family and my friends. Right now, I pray that no more kids can get killed like Tamir Rice did. I pray for our safety. I pray that we can grow up and become adults. So now I'm crying again. He's crying. And I get angry. I get angry because what weighs me down, particularly about being a Christian, a person of faith, is the kinds of things we waste time in our prayers with God. I don't want to spend time praying to God to not die, or for other people to not die, or to end wars. Part of the reason I'm an abolitionist is because I want to pray to God for more interesting things, more beautiful things, more mundane things, right? I want them to pray about new video games that are coming out, or for the Memphis Grizzlies to beat the Lakers. Like, those are the kinds of prayers that I want to have in my relationship. Make me a better person, a more curious person. Those are the desires that I have for my children. So when I think about what gets in the way of our flourishing, of our liberation, it's policing, it's prisons, it's institutions of oppression. And so I feel grateful and proud as a mother and someone who's still working through my parenting that my kids have these analyses. But I want their minds to have to be able to experience and think and dream of something so much more. So much more. I think the most amazing thing about our faith is that we get to answer our own prayers. Do y'all know that? We get to answer our own prayers. People who prayed for the end of slavery, they didn't simply wait for God. Imagine had they did. So many of us would still be in chains. Right. What did they start doing? They started running. Right. They started rebelling. They started rising up. The people who chose not to run literally braided patterns in people's hair so they can find freedom routes to Canada. Yeah. They prepared food for each other. They prayed, they sang. You know, they helped establish an underground railroad. Yeah. They hid people in their homes. They hid weapons in their homes just in case they needed to defend themselves against people trying to attack them. You know, we talk about Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman not only went back several times, she created the conditions for children to free and to flee the plantation. Some of y'all can't even handle babies on airplanes. Harriet Tubman had toddlers going from Maryland to Canada, not getting caught by slave patrols. And y'all can't handle an hour flight on a Southwest plane? Right? So when we talk about the conditions of our liberation, we have to remember about this broader struggle that we all belong to. And so when I told Juice, I'm so grateful that you prayed for that. What do you think we can do? And he said, I don't know, but I want to find out. I want to think about what it is I can do. And so sometimes this word abolition gets thrown around and it feels intimidating. If you don't mind sharing by a show of hands, when you first heard of abolition or defund, did it overwhelm you? Can you raise your hand if it did? I'll raise my hand. I said, defund what? Abolish what? Do you know the kind of neighborhood I grew up with? You want to take away the police? What? That's terrifying. And then you learn that police are part of the problem, that there are 1 million cops and 18,000 law enforcement agencies, but still 15,000 homicides every year. Yeah. In the places where there's the greatest police presence, like Chicago or Baltimore or DC where I live or St. Louis where I'm from, there's more police and the murder rate increases. Right. So we're funding to police so we can feel better that there's an option to call. But police don't stop bullets from flying into Black people's homes. They show up and pick up the bodies. Sometimes they put the bodies in the streets themselves. Right. And so the more I started to understand what people were demanding, the more I became attracted and understanding of, oh wow, I do need a better analysis of this problem. I do need to understand that police not only contribute to 3 people being killed a day, as a matter of fact, we have to change that number. We have to change that number. Just last year, this major report came out and said there's been a 30,000 undercount in the number of deaths by police. Right. Do you know why? Because cops are working with people who do autopsies to change the cause of death. Right. So actually, that number is higher than 3 people a day. So we don't even know the full extent of just the killings, right? And that's not even the evictions, right? That's not the Border Patrol. Those are just the people whose lives have lost. And so when you go on Washington Post website and they tell you that, police killed 1,000 people this year through shootings, do you know who's not counted in those numbers? George Floyd. Right. He wasn't shot. Tyree Nichols, right. He wasn't shot. Right. So we have all these other people who are dying through more diverse ways through police violence, and their lives are not even counted as a part of the official record. And so when Juice asked, I don't know what we can do, Mommy, but I want to find out. I think about what it means to hear something like abolition. It's kind of like heaven or hell. When you hear hell, at least for me, I'm like, whoa, that's a lot. How do I not go to that place, right? It sounds terrifying. Or climate change. How are we supposed to stop climate change, right? And I think about the climate change activists who said, well, you individually are not responsible for stopping the entire planet from reaching 4 degrees higher. But here are the things you can do personally. Here are the things you can do with your community. So for people who are just feeling overwhelmed by abolition, what I simply mean when I say we need to abolish police or abolish prisons, it means that we need to reduce the reasons why people think that we need them. We need to reduce our reliance on them, and we need to build institutions that help us thrive and flourish and grow. And some people say, well, Derecka, I'm on board with that. But can we build all that stuff first before we defund the police? You're putting the cart before the horse. Do you all know this phrase? You're putting the cart before the horse. I have people who are right there with me and say, whoa. Let's build all the things that we need, and then we can start shrinking the police. We can't do that. Amen. We have to do both at the same time, right, over time. Right. Because historically, you can clap, you want to clap? Of course you can clap. Historically, this is not my opinion, historically, when people have tried to do street violence interruption, guess who disrupted those efforts?
Right.
The police, because their job security and their legitimacy was threatened.
Yes.
Police and firefighters in Boston in the late 70s literally started fires and conducted break-ins because there was going to be a reduction in their budgets and they didn't want to lose their jobs. Right? When the Black Panthers and the Young Lords and the Young Patriots were in Chicago doing free breakfast programs and doing street community paramedic ambulatory services, guess who went in the churches and destroyed the meals? The police. That's not propaganda. You can find that in a PBS documentary. I said, PBS is showing this? This must not even be the whole story if PBS is showing this angle. When the Black Liberation Army was going block, block, block and saying, hey, y'all, people, stop selling drugs in our own neighborhood. Who infiltrated the BLA and killed their leaders? The police, right? When Fred Hampton in Chicago said, you know, I've been saying this thing wrong. We've been blaming white people for all our problems. We were saying white when we should have been saying capitalists. Who killed Fred Hampton? And who helped him? The FBI, right? And so you start thinking, well, if we can't do street violence interruption, we can't feed meals to children, we can't provide ambulatory services because all of this threatens our job security, then maybe we shouldn't have a jobs program that's linked and connected to the violence that they maintain in our communities, right? You can again you don't have to take my word for it. You can take ex-mayor Lori Lightfoot of Chicago. When defund first entered into the mainstream in 2020, you know what she said? Verbatim. You all want to eliminate one of the few ways that Black and brown people can enter the middle class in Chicago? Right? A jobs program. So we can't let bad jobs get in the way of a good life. We can't do that. We deserve so much more than that. So if you still feel overwhelmed by the idea of abolition of police, I don't have 3 points because I'm not a Baptist preacher. It's not my lane. But what I do have is just some ways that you can find your lane and get on the road. I love that language. So first, it's similar to what Niall asked us to do earlier. Focus. Right? Understand the problem. Most people who I come into contact with disagree with abolition because of how it sounds. And I go, well, what have you read? What have you listened to? What were the debates? What did you agree with and what did you disagree with? But we can't be against abolition because of our feelings, right? We can't do that. We can't do that. So if you're not ready to commit and come do the altar call for abolition, all I'm doing is ask first that you read and understand and having a problem. Disagree with something, agree with something, but don't totally reject it, right? If you're like, okay, I've read some stuff, I've been talking to people about it, I'm not quite yet ready to jump all in, but I know that what we have is wrong. For the people who are in that part of our road, I just want you to do one simple thing. Just help us freeze things. Freeze. That's it. Freeze. We need moratoriums on police academies. We need moratoriums on budgets. We need moratoriums on jail and prison construction. We don't need to build any more of this carceral institution that we have. That's it. Just stop it. Just stop it. You can go to a budget meeting, right? You can call some people. You can use your prison ministry at your church to say, well, I love going into the prisons and fellowshipping with people inside, but man, I wish they were out, right? You have the power to freeze. And so I'm asking you, if you're at that part of your journey where you know enough and you're ready to continue to work, just help us freeze the system. If you're a little bit past that and say, okay, I'm all about freezing, I want to fight. We need you. We need fighters. We need people who are going to fight, quite literally, the construction of Cop City in Atlanta. We need people who are going to fight the creation of more budget and more community oversight programs that don't have any power, but grant all the legitimacy. We need people to fight, and this is the most important, because this impacts everyone. We need people to fight the criminalization of dissent. Do you know what that means? Okay, so right now, y'all follow the news. I'm sure you follow the news. This is a very important, very intelligent crowd. You all follow the news. Have you heard about Roe v. Wade? Yeah. It's like this little Supreme Court decision that just got overturned last year, you know? Yeah, so who do you think is gonna be enforcing that? Right, police. Who do you think is going to be checking for women who are traveling across states to get reproductive care? Right. Who do you think? Who do you think is going to be locking up or threatening at least to lock up teachers who are trying to teach racial justice history? Yeah. Right? Who do you think is going to be killing and fighting and stopping climate change activists from trying to keep our planet cool? No matter your issue, if you are fighting for freedom and justice, guess who would be on the opposite side of you? The police. And what has happened since 2014, there has been a stark rise in laws that are criminalizing our dissent, that are making police into a protected category, as if they're a minority. And so all those penalties impact our rights to resist in this country. So we need people to fight the criminalization of dissent. Amen. And so if you're focusing, if you're deciding that you can help us freeze, if you can decide if you can help us fight, we need fabricators, not liars, not those kind of fabricators. Fabricators are people who build. Yes. The word fabricate comes from this Latin word, means to manufacture skillfully. Yeah. Skillfully, right? Yeah. And so when I hear people even try to say, I try to talk to people in my family or my church about abolition, and they just dismiss me, what do? I said, go have another conversation. Continue to have a conversation. You're not trying to convert people, you're trying to be in relationship, right? We need people to be manufacturers and fabricators of our ideas to bring them into life. And where does that start? In our families, in our prayers with my kids, in spaces like this. And we need people to go build alternatives, go experiment, go try stuff. In DC, where I live, where I split time, there is this devastating report that came out a few years ago that there is a 10-degree temperature difference in one part of town versus the other part of town. In Northwest DC, where it's whiter and more affluent, it's cooler because there are more trees planted. In Southeast DC, where I lived, there was a dearth of trees. And so we're talking about in July, a difference between 70 and 80 or 80 and 90 degrees. So fewer trees, what does that mean? Higher bills. Yeah. So when my grandma used to say, stop running in and out of that house, it wasn't her imagination. It was because people who live in more exploited communities have higher bills because there are fewer trees. Right. Higher bills means more attention, more stress because you're using your limited exploited paycheck to now try to cover the rent, cover the utility, cover food. Fights increase. Yeah. Right? So you have people who are living in overcrowded neighborhoods, go outside to be cool, and guess what? They are criminalized through loitering. Yeah. So we need abolitionist projects that are dedicated to planting more trees. Yeah. That could be the work that you do. And so what's so beautiful, what I am always committed to abolitionist struggle, is that there is room for everyone on the road. There's labor. However way you can show up, we need you. And so I am more and more excited to looking forward to our conversation and then to be able to take questions. But there are people who are doing work here. If you're interested in learning what's going on nationally, please let me know. You can talk to me, you can email me. And again, I'm just so grateful to be in conversation with you all today. Thank you.
All right. Perfect. Thank you all, and thank you all for bearing through the transitioning from moving the pulpit out of the way. I'm so grateful for this conversation and to sit in the presence of these two phenomenal people, Derecka and Niall. And can we just thank them again for their words and their gifts? You know, when we were dreaming about this program, this conference, you know, we dreamed that it would be impactful, but we didn't know all of the ways that the intersections of the Holy Spirit would work. I don't know if you know this, Derecka, but the Alliance got its start over that very fight, over women in the pulpit. That's how it started. In 1987, these group of people. And so for you, these years later, to stand here, it's a testament of the abolitionist imagination that's organic to the Alliance. And so for the next 45 or so minutes, 30 or so minutes, however much energy we have, I want to engage you all in a conversation to go even deeper, right? And to give you all more time, as teachers, as activists, as scholars, you know, there are many different ways to analyze, right? And there's monologue, and a monologue is very important. And there's the dialogue. There's the conversation. There's the learning. There's the analysis that happens in conversation. And so conversation is important too. And so here's how I want to start. Derecka, I'll start with you. You know, me, Judge Griffin, a number of other people first came to your work through writing. I read an article that you wrote in the summer of 2020 when I was trying to figure out how to respond, right, to everything. And I guess I just want to start with this. Why did you write Becoming Abolitionist? Why was writing a book for you a tangible part of the abolitionist movement?
Wow, thank you so much. No, I did not know that history about the Alliance, and so I am definitely going to cry after this because that's really beautiful, and I'm going to be sending a nice little message to my former church about this. The church actually that I write about in the book, so why did I write? I write generally because I'm an artist, and it's what makes me come alive. I can't do anything else if there's something inside of me that I need to put on the paper. And so I have notes, papers, so many things everywhere. So that's why I sort of write generally. My mother was/is a comedian, and then my grandmother was a poet, was a writer. So I grew up reading and writing all the time, making up stories, being the audience for my mom's very dirty jokes. And so this is sort of what made me possible. I didn't plan on writing a book. I was trying to decide if I should go into a PhD program. And it was actually the historian Robin D.G. Kelly, who said, you don't need to get a PhD to write about abolition. She said, we're in a movement, and this was 2017. This was even before abolition entered to the mainstream. He said, you know, we're in a freedom struggle, and we need to read and think about this now. And you should write a book now. And I was like, whatever, Robin, that's ridiculous. There's no way I'm writing a book. And then 3 years later, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and George Floyd all get killed during the pandemic, right? And I'm watching defund enter the mainstream. And this is, I say this often, you know, people have been thinking and dreaming of abolition, particularly around prisons and police, since the Quakers introduced the first prison in the United States, the first penitentiary, they've been trying to abolish it since the 1700s. So there's so much of a rich history and tradition between our faith and our struggles. And so by the time everyone else, CNN, starts talking about abolition and defund, I get an email from an editor at The Atlantic, and she says, hey, can you write about abolition? And I said, okay, well, what am I angry about right now? And at the time, I was angry at black mayors who said, all of these white people are coming into the inner cities and they're saying abolition and defund, and they're going back to their well-resourced, police departments, and these outside agitators are just, they don't have your best interest in mind. So I was mad at Ras Baraka and Lori Lightfoot and all these people who were saying this. And so I was like, I'm gonna write about all of the black feminist revolutionary abolitionists, and I'm gonna tell the story through the lens of someone who grew up in a neighborhood where we called 911 for everything. So the first line of the piece that I wrote for The Atlantic was, we called 911 for everything except snitching.
Yeah.
And so I just say, we relied on the police because the police were a normal part of our lives, right? They were violent, they were my mom's friends. We had books and badges programs where the cops would come to our school and show guns. It wasn't like I came out of the womb like wanting or not wanting cops. It's just that they were a part of our lives. And so I wrote about, what it meant for us to grow up in that environment and still to feel unsafe by neighbors, by strangers, by lovers, by siblings, and from the police. And so that article really set the stage for the rest of the book. And so part of the book is around my own political and personal journey around abolition, and other activists, organizers, novelists in the book who, again, wanted the violence to stop. And at the time, wanting the violence to stop was being conflated as wanting good relationships with police. And those are not the same thing. So that's why in that article I say, well, if this is a matter of broken trust, where was the trust ever intact? Like historically. When were police and people that they hurt and exploit ever on good terms? When? Was it during slavery when there were slave patrols? Was it during Reconstruction? Was it during Jim Crow? Was it during the Rodney King riots? Was it during Occupy? Was it during what kind of rewriting of history of this from the left, from the right, and from liberals? What restore? And so trying to articulate that story with some history, with some personal narrative, and with lots of organizations who've been doing abolitionist work.
Wow. Wow. No, thank you. Thank you for walking us through that. And I want to come back to the different ways you tell the story in the book. Nala, I want to come to you though. So Nala and I went to college together. We went to Morehouse College down the road. And it's it's funny because a lot of people have been here from Morehouse kind of coincidentally, but I think there is something that kind of happens there. It's a product of this thing that we're talking about, right? Morehouse is 1867. A lot of historically black colleges come right after enslavement ends, and so there's a tradition there. But this isn't a Morehouse fan club. But what I wanted to say to you, but we went to college together at the same time, but I didn't know you well in college. I first got to know you, and I don't know if you remember this, in 2014, you did an event at Riverside Church in New York. And I knew the pastor of Riverside at the time, and she invited me up, said, this radical activist is doing something, and I just want you to be in the room to listen. And so I was like, all right, and I was in Riverside, and I think you did a 7 last words service dedicated to the people who had been killed up until then. And that's how I was introduced to your imagination. I remember then thinking, that was so courageous and profound, but I wasn't where you were at the time, right? And so I'm curious, for you, like what was behind that event, and why do you continue to talk to church people, right, as an abolitionist?
Well, thank you so much. Can y'all hear me? Yeah, man. You could talk about Morehouse as long as you want. I'm just saying. Spelman too. Oh yeah, of course.
Our superior.
Of course. Thank you for the question. I do want to shout out something Derecka said, just in case y'all didn't write down that sentence. It's so good. She said, let's not let bad jobs get in the way of a good life. Yeah. I just want to say it one more time. I don't know if y'all tweeted it or wrote it down or committed it to memory, but it's a bar. It's really good. And I don't want to let that slide or slip. So I grew up in a small little Pentecostal church in Newark, New Jersey, where we ran around and sweat a lot, spoke in tongues that I didn't understand, and people fell out and they would put towels over them. And it was real vibrant, you know? It was real vibrant and it was very loving. The theology, I now can look back and say it wasn't a liberal or progressive theology. But there was deep love in the church. And I was 5, 6 years old, and I remember just receiving peppermints from the mothers of the church to make sure I tried to stay up during service. It was the institution that told me that I mattered. Before there was a movement for Black Lives or a Black Lives Matter movement, I already knew I mattered because of that church. And so I know now that my entire activism, my scholarship, my ministry, it all flows out of a small little Pentecostal church in Newark, New Jersey, with working class and poor Black people who may not have had all the language, but who had good hearts. And so I can deal with church people who have stuff because I grew up with church people who had good hearts, but not always the best ideas. That's my family. Yeah. That's my church. That's my people, you know? So, and I feel called to those kinds of people because I was one of them too. I also didn't come out the womb reading James Cone. You know what I'm saying? Like when I was if y'all heard my sermons when I was 16, I had a lot of energy, but you know, it just wasn't all there yet. So I've come a long way, thankfully, to some of the people I named in my sermon that I read. The service. I went to Ferguson on a bus ride. A brother by the name of Darnell Moore organized bus rides from across the country to Ferguson. I happened to be friends with him, so I hopped on a bus in New York City to Ferguson. And it was really me cutting my teeth for my first time in activism. I had done local work, but I hadn't done anything nationally. And I got baptized in the streets of Ferguson with a fire of revolution. And I got back on that bus to go home to New York. And I said, there's not a single church that I know that I can go to this Sunday to express what I experienced in Ferguson and what I experienced that led me to Ferguson. I had just read, speaking of James Cone, there's this wonderful book some of you may know about called The Cross and the Lynching Tree. And it's like one of the coolest, most creative, devastating critiques theologically that I've ever read in my life. And I was thinking about Michael Brown's body laying on the ground. And these sort of different things start coming together. And I said, wait, there's something about that analogy that James Cone made. And there's something about what Black churches do on Good Friday. You know, Good Friday is the highlight of the Black church. There's something about our relationship to death that speaks to our theology. And so I said, I don't know of a church, but in the spirit of abolition or in the spirit of freedom and justice, we got to create the thing that's not there. And so it was a very simple idea in the spirit of James Cone, which was to preach the last words of Black people killed by cops. And we used their words as sacred text to preach the gospel from a perspective of Black liberation theology. I'll give you an example. The first time I preached it was actually at Shiloh Baptist Church in Trenton, New Jersey, and I preached the last words of Jordan Davis, who was 17 years old, who was killed in, I believe, Sanford, Florida, Jacksonville, Florida. And he was playing music at a gas station with his friends, hip hop music. They went to go get some gum, maybe some cigarettes. And Michael Dunn told him to turn the music down. And Jordan Davis looked at him. He looked at his friend, he said, fuck that nigga, turn that shit up. That's what Jordan Davis said. And after he said that, Michael Dunn shot into the car and killed the 17-year-old precious Black boy. So I was like, I'm gonna preach that one.
Yeah.
I said, I don't know what church gonna let me.
I mean,
But it was a Morehouse brother, actually,
See?
who knew a church in Trenton. And I said, I want to preach this sermon, but it kind of got some cuss words in it, talking about Jesus cussing out the tree. And the pastor allowed us to do it. And it was still to this day one of my proudest things that I've done, not because there was a whole lot of people there or because it's something that I want to brand. It's nothing like that. It was a moment where I said, the best of what I felt in that Pentecostal church, the love, the peppermints, you know, that fire came together with the best of what I have been learning in Black liberation theology, the critique of systems, the commitment to transforming the world, coming together, and of course using creativity. I think that so much of our imagination can take us to places that kind of dogmatic understandings of religion can't.
Yes.
And so a part of that's what was coming out of that.
wow, wow, wow. You know, Derecka, you've laid out for us, right, earlier, what you mean by being an abolitionist. And I was wondering if you could just repeat, that sentence or those couple of sentences, for us so that we can also maybe commit that. Because I think, like you said, it sounds scary, even though it also sounds like what Jesus said in Luke 4.
Yeah.
So before I go there, help us to hear that again.
Yes, so when I talk about abolition, what I am talking about is a political commitment to eradicate community, carceral, colonial, and capitalist violence.
Yes.
Right. At the same time, over time.
Yeah.
Also building what's necessary for individuals, communities, society, and our planet to thrive. Right. So what's expansive about that definition is that it obviously names the kinds of harms, right? It's not, there's different debates within abolition. This is what gets frustrating when I get asked to be on the panel with someone who is on the other side of abolition. There's so many different, y'all church people, there's so many different debates about what it means to be Baptist.
Yeah.
I got baptized twice just in case. I've been submerged, I've been sprinkled on, I've been in Jesus' name, I've been in the Father, Son, I'm not even sure, but I think that I'm covered. I think it's good. So just like there are debates within our faith traditions and our denominations, there are debates within abolition. So there are some people who believe that abolition, we can use it as a framework to sort of see everything. And I think that's valuable, and I think there's a lot of utility. I think about abolition a little bit more narrowly, and it's important to name climate justice, disability justice, feminism, socialism as a part of our broader abolitionist struggle, because I've met abolitionists who are not anti-capitalist. And I was like, well, let's think about this. Police were, now you had this really beautiful sentence that slavery wasn't America's, what is it? It was the best of capitalism, right? We talk about slavery as a system of racial injustice. It was a labor system of capitalism, right? And who managed that? When Du Bois is talking about overseers and slave patrols and police, he said it gave poor landless white men a source of pride and a source of income, right? So this is the bad jobs for a good life, right? So that understanding of, well, they're managing people who are being exploited. Colonialism. Sometimes people say, well, Derecka, people in Britain don't kill people like police kill in the U.S. We can just have police how we have in Britain or in other parts of Europe. And I say, well, the police in Europe formed out of colonialism. Right. So we're trading police that came out of capitalism and slavery in the U.S. with police that came out of colonialism. If you look at all of the colonies of Great Britain, all of their police systems emerged after colonialism.
Right.
And that's true from Nigeria to Mexico, right? Mexico didn't have its police system until it's colonized by Spain. Ireland, right, becomes the initial testing ground for police because of its colonization under Great Britain. I don't want colonizing police. I don't want capitalism or slavery. I want the kinds of lives that we can have and thrive together. And so I think it's important to name these other systems and other frameworks of how we approach. So when I sort of said, well, it's important for you to understand what people mean when they say abolition, including the debates within them. So that's why I think the first point was focus, read with someone else, join a book club, right? We're not gonna book club our way into liberation, but I think it will give you a place as a starting ground. No, I have to say that because some people think you can do a workbook and then now you're free. And it's like, no. I want y'all to read my book. You should read my book, but there's so many other materials that are free and accessible that you can use to debate and think around these issues. So the first point was just focus and figure out, well, what's this thing, right? After that, I said focus, and I said freeze. If you're not ready to say, well, let's defund or abolish, but you agree at least that the system is wrong, that it's bad, and you don't have to agree, it's a fact that cops are killing more people, even as the prosecutions of police are going up. Even, y'all see these lawsuits where families are getting paid millions of dollars. Yeah. Do you think that's slowing down police violence? No. Now they're just literally paying to kill. Right? If you don't think blacker cops, more feminine cops, gayer cops are going to save us, well, the least that you can do is help freeze the system and call for moratoriums to stop what people are trying to expand. So that was freeze. After freeze, I said fight. Yep. We need people to resist. We need people to put their time, their resources, and for those who are trained and willing, their bodies on the line for justice. And that's a very hard thing to ask. But again, we don't win because we seek permission from our oppressors. All right? That's not how anything gets done. And it's not, this is the last thing I'll say because I don't want to take up too much time. I also will sometimes hear people say, well, I just don't like how defund sounds. I just don't like how, it's just, maybe if we switch up the language, the people who are passing laws to ban critical race theory aren't passing laws because they don't like how it sounds. Say that.
That's good. That's good.
They're passing the laws because they don't like critical race theory.
Hello. Well.
Hello. Even when President Obama and Joe Biden say, defund the police, no one knows what it means. It's a catchy slogan. Well, President Obama, let's see, you were president. You went to Columbia, you went to Harvard, you taught at University of Chicago. You can't figure out what defund and abolition means? That's interesting. You don't have an issue with the word, you have an issue with the demand. Yeah. Be honest about that so we can debate on better terms. Right. The people who did not want suffrage for women were not opposed to the word suffrage. They didn't want women to vote. So the semantics, we're gonna continue to keep switching the word for people who are not with our underlying goal of liberation. And so I think that we should hold on to these terms, continue to struggle over them, teach, educate, be in community. But we can't just abandon names of things because people don't like it or pretend as if they don't know it. Right. And so I invite people who are willing to fight, to focus, to learn, to be in the struggle that's trying to resist the construction, the building of what we have to be opposed to, which includes the criminalization of our dissent, our right to protest, our right to go into the streets, our right to record police, right? All of this we need to fight vigorously to protect. So, and then the last thing was to fabricate, which means to build constructively, to build skillfully, artfully, and that means that everyone has a role. So the example I gave around building trees, right? You may not think of that as an abolitionist project. It's not if you're gonna do it with cops, but if you do it with your church, if you do it in community, if you say, well, we think that our theory of change means that this is going to help decrease violence, which decreases our role and reliance on police, then we should do that. So we need builders. We need people to not only be fishers, we need people to be builders.
That's good. One of the things that you said earlier in that, Derecka, you said at the same time and over time.
Yes.
And now at the same time and over time, you're a theologian, right? Reminds me of already and not yet.
Yeah.
You know, that you're saying that presently there's something, and then there's a future something as well, right? So one of the things that either of you I think can sort of respond to is so when we think of at the same time and over time, I think elsewhere in the book, Derecka, you talk about that like we can be abolitionists through incrementalism or so help us understand some of these on-ramps. Say people are like, you know what, like now it really got me fired up. I'm looking at the fig tree differently. Derecka really has me fired up. But some, I know this crowd. They want to know. So how are some of these ways that we can hold that tension of the at the same time, over time? What should we be looking for as we vote, as we plan?
You want to me?
Either.
You want me to start? I didn't know. You was pointing at me. I didn't know. Wow, so many. This is why I said it's important to do this within institutions and with other people. Because y'all are coming from all across the country. Is that true?
And mostly the South.
Mostly the South. Oh, wow, fertile ground. Mostly the South. So, yeah, there's just this is why it's exciting, because there's so many different ways. So I gave the examples about planting trees. There are people in the South who are, for the short term, are doing things that contribute to things like street violence interruption, right? There are people who are going and demanding participatory budgeting processes in their city councils so they can be a part of the conversations and say, no, half of our city budget is going to police. We don't want that to happen. Here are the other proven ways that we can reduce harm in our communities without increasing money for carceral institutions. That's one way. So anytime you have the opportunity to oppose prison, jail construction, police academy construction, do that. Like we need and that's just the carceral lens. Again, it's much, much broader. So for example, in the book I read about how black women rely on 911 more than white women because of, in domestic and interpersonal violence disputes. And when people went to go talk to the women who were calling 911, they weren't calling because they trusted the police more or needed the police more. They were calling because they needed actually daycare. Yeah. And after they would get into a fight, they would have to go back home to the person that they were fighting with. And so when I hear people, have these debates around whether we should have universal child care, they probably don't think about that as abolitionists. But universal child care could quite literally save lives. Yeah. If people are trying to figure out, I write about Inez in the book. Inez said her husband was very abusive. And when one time she called the police, the cops came and she said, I don't want him prosecuted, I just want the fighting to stop. Because if he gets prosecuted, he's gonna lose his job, we won't be able to afford daycare, I'm gonna be homeless. And that's exactly what happened, right? And so Inez is like, I just needed a way to pay for childcare so I can get myself together to relocate. And so we need people for fighting for progressive policies that frees up people to have agency. We talk about freedom and liberation a lot, but people need agency. Yeah. They need to be empowered with the resources to go and move on something if they need to. Same thing with student debt cancellation. I had student debt. I have so much student debt, it's not even funny. No, seriously, lots of student debt, right? I don't have student debt because I'm an irresponsible borrower. I have student debt because since slavery, there's been no one in my family until me who has not been in poverty. No, quite literally. there has been no time. So it's not a financial literacy issue. It's just legacies of people who are still recovering from transatlantic slavery have to pay money to go to school, okay? For other people, they decide who they're going to marry based on debt.
Right. Right.
Isn't that a shame? Like, they decide who's a viable partner based on income. That's not agency. And so when we are not right now, we're engaged in a student debt fight cancellation because what will it do? Give people agency to be in the kinds of relationships that they desire instead of someone who is a, quote, breadwinner, right? And so we need people who are fighting for all of these kinds of progressive institutions, progressive policies, progressive people who are in office who are going to fight for this stuff because that, again, frees us up from having to rely on people who are potentially harmful, rely on institutions like police and prisons that are absolutely dangerous in order to make us feel safe. And so there are lots of ways to do that. I have lots of examples in the book. And again, if you're curious about what kinds of organizations are doing work locally, just let me know. You can email me or just ask me, and I'll think about it, or I'll know someone who knows, and then I'll make sure you get plugged in.
Derek and I work with this organization called the Dream Defenders. Has anyone heard of the Dream Defenders? You heard of the Dream Defenders? They were both of our, we call them our movement crush. We sort of really like them from afar, and we've been able to work with them more intimately. They have my favorite chant. I love chants. Anybody else love chants? I love chants, like love chants. Probably because I play basketball and I just, whatever. So they have this chant that if you're okay, I want you to say with me. It's gonna deal a little bit with this question of time. Y'all ready?
Wait, are you gonna stand up or are you gonna sit down?
Do I need to stand up?
You gotta stand up if you have the power
all right.
chant.
So, all right, y'all can stand up if you can. I don't even need the mic.
All right.
All right, so when I say the word, you say the word back. It's not gonna take long, all right? Power. Power. Power.
Power.
Power.
Power.
Transformation.
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 And miracles.
And miracles.
And miracles.
And miracles.
I need it.
I need it.
I want it.
I want it.
I got to have it.
I got to have it.
Right now.
Right now.
Right now.
Right now.
Right now.
Right now. Right now. Right now. Wow.
That's
I thought
why
you were gonna jump and run. You didn't do the
I,
whole
you know,
thing.
it gets real rowdy, so I was just trying to give you like a medium. I love that chant because to me that chant speaks to what Dr. King called the fierce urgency of now.
Right.
Dr. King had this intimate awareness that he wouldn't be here that long.
Right.
And so that message is coming from a deeply personal place as well. But it's also coming from a political analysis that the world is burning. That world house that Dr. King talked about is being threatened by the fires of injustice. So what am I saying? On the one hand, the Dream Defender stands in this long tradition of people, not just of Dr. King, who called the fierce urgency of now, but a Chinese-American organizer and activist and philosopher by the name of Grace Lee Boggs, who always asked the question, what time is it on the clock of the world? Yeah, I like that. I like that. I like that because part of what it does is it puts Dr. King's question in perspective. So on the one hand, you have this fierce urgency of now. And on the other hand, you have Grace Lee Boggs saying, what time is it on the clock of the world? And the way we respond to that question says so much about how we think about time. So one way to respond to that is to say, well, it's April
22nd,
2023. Another is to say, our species have been in this struggle for about 10,000 or 12,000 years, depending on how you tell the story, of this particular moment in agricultural, right? That post sort of agricultural moment, where the human species has been struggling around this rise of inequality and injustice, and we have 70, 80, if we're lucky, maybe 90 years, maybe some of us 40 or 50, to figure out how to respond to thousands of years of oppression. Sometimes we really don't understand. I'm going to say, sometimes I don't really understand the magnitude of what we're fighting against. We think that we're just having an argument with our partner and our partner's being, toxic in their masculinity. That's hundreds and thousands of years that are being expressed through one person in a kitchen argument.
Well,
so what time is it on the clock of the world allows us, I think, to put Dr. King's question in perspective. Someone by the name of Avery Gordon used this term, abolition time. And abolition time really speaks to this combination of having this urgency of, I gotta fight right now. But alongside a humility that we've been in this long tradition of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of people and foot soldiers who said, what's my particular contribution at this time in life in that grand story? 10,000 years, 12,000 years, to see it from a different perspective. So I think all I really have to offer is abolition, I think, is about holding those two different conceptions of time together and saying, how do we keep the fire burning of that urgency while also having a revolutionary humility to know that in our little lifetime, we might not change the whole thing, but we can change something.
That's good.
Wow, can I add to that really
Please,
quickly?
please.
The urgency for me comes up when I realize that if we don't do what we can now, the people for the next 10,000 years will be behind. Right? That's what's at stake. If our generation either don't decide to learn more, to freeze and shrink and to stop, to at least have the conversation, to not be dismissive, to fight while we can, to stop the criminalization of our dissent. If we don't do that, we're gonna make it harder for our future, the people who are coming down this road, to be a part of our struggle, right? That's what weighs on me. It's just that, well, once we identify the call for this generation, right? How can we understand ourselves as making sure that people not only don't be behind, but maybe even have a head start, right? And so when I hear some of the backlash around the policy, the campaign that failed in Minnesota to remove some funding, please, away from the police, not to even totally defund it, as like, oh, see, people don't want it. Those people are not on the right time. That was even a campaign proposal is a win, right? That's a win, Until who's been fighting besides libertarians around trying to reduce government spending, specifically around, policing. It's like that, to me, is just phenomenal, that this is a debate, that this conference is happening at the time where it's happening, and this is the theme, right? This is a theme, and so I just feel so grateful to be alive with the people who are working and organizing and struggling right now. Part of me mourns that I won't see the total eradication of police and prisons. I mourn that future. And part of my mourning that future also is a deep rejoicing in knowing that it's gonna come, right? It's like, it's amazing. Just as I know that there are people who ran and rebelled and didn't anticipate that slavery would end in their lifetime, but they ran anyway, right? And they probably mourn not being alive on April 9th, 1865, right? Which ironically is also my birthday. I was like, wow, a little Civil War baby, right? Like, they didn't get to see that. Du Bois didn't get to see, or Frederick Douglass or Harriet Tubman, they didn't get to see. No, Harriet Tubman died in 1913. She died 5 years before my great-grandmother was born. My great-grandmother passed when I was in my 20s, right? Look at that time, right? And so people who have been struggling, they probably are mourning not being able to see what we've been able to yield today. But I'm sure that they're rejoicing. I'm so happy that they tried anyway.
We're gonna open it up to some questions from the audience. And then we'll just share this one. While you get ready to do that, I want to ask one more question related to this time piece, because when you share with the story about your, the distance between your great-grandmother and Harriet Tubman not really being a distance, right? And we think about this time thing, and then, of course, you began your remarks, Derecka, with the question / cry / prayer of your son, right? As a historian, right, I study change over time. And I think one of the things that I've been impressed upon as I study the past is just how close we are to them. You've used the word a number of times, both of you actually, on the issue of descent. Again, the Holy Spirit is in here. Aren't Baptists all about descent? And they're saying there's a criminalization happening in Florida, Louisiana, Georgia, Texas, North Carolina, Virginia, Washington, D.C., at the federal level. And there are Baptists in Georgia, Florida, Texas, Louisiana, North Carolina, South Carolina, Arkansas. And there's a criminalization of dissent. And the Baptist tradition started in opposition. That's a part of the abolitionist vision. My question was going to be, my question was going to be this. When we think about time, and this is again for both of you, and we'll take one of the questions from the floor. Who are some of the ancestors? Who are some of the people that we're close to who remind us that we got to keep pushing, that we're going to see this through? And a follow-up secondary question is, can we embrace ancestors that are different from us? Can white folks see Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman as intellectual, agitational, theological ancestors? Either, I don't know.
I'll let you take the last part because we've talked a bit about that, I think. Can white people or people, can you have ancestors of different? My father was born in 1931. He's no longer here with us. And my father never identified as an activist. He was born in Newark, New Jersey in the height of the Great Depression. Black people at that time, if you went to college, if you went to high school and graduated, like that was a big deal. My dad was able to go to high school, he graduated. He had 4 boys that he was raising on his own. And he was in this Pentecostal church that he was very faithful to. Growing up, I never heard my dad identify as an activist or a freedom fighter. He loved Dr. King and Gandhi, but he never identified that way. But he built the door of the church. He took the church van every Sunday morning really early, and he picked up all the mothers of the church who couldn't make it on their own and made sure they got there. He would go in the basement before the pastor was done the sermon, and he would start cooking fried chicken. And he loved the ham with the pineapples on it. Y'all know about that? The ham, you put the pineapples. I used to have to put the pick and then put the pineapple. And then when my brother, who's also no longer here with us, was going to a school where they were railroading the black kids out of that school and putting them in an alternative school, which is like kind of like a prison educational sort of system that was modeled after a prison. My dad was 70 years old at this point, and he went to the school parking lot every single day. He was retired, and he protested for 360-something days outside of my brother's school saying no alternative school.
Right.
The day that they tried to send my brother and a bunch of black students to that alternative school, my father stood in the driveway at 70 years old to make sure that that bus did not go into the driveway, and he was arrested. The reason, and I can name so many people whose names you may know, and they're there. They're on my bedside, and they're on my bookshelf, they're in my conversations. But I think about my dad a lot, not only because he's no longer here, but because he only wanted to be known as a child of God. Mm-hmm. And I realize now that he did his activism work without having to have the title. He just said, I'm gonna just try to do what's right. And sometimes I don't even understand all of the different complexities of how we need to change the world. I get confused too. It's a lot. And my dad centers me, he grounds me, and he says, now you might not understand every issue. You might get a bunch of titles and fellowships and grants, but remember at the end of the day that the greatest title is to be a child of God and to just try to do what's right.
Yeah.
And so for me, my dad is one of my most blessed freedom fighters who taught me how to do the work, the hard work, the work in the basement that's needed for us in this struggle.
Thank you. I always love that story and am deeply inspired by it. Can we have different ancestors? All right, so the first thing I want to say is that words like ancestors are neutral.
Yeah.
They're neutral. I know we talk about being our ancestors' wildest dreams, but there's some ancestors we shouldn't want to be their wildest dreams.
Right.
You know? Yeah, it's same with imagination. I hear, we need to expand our imagination. Well, imagination can be used for good or for bad. For good and for bad, right? Someone imagined to put cuffs around people's wrists to stop their resistance, right? That's imagination. We need all because these things are so neutral. Whenever we find our ancestors, the people who make our particular struggle possible, we call that a tradition, right? And so we should have as many people as we can as a part of that tradition and not section ourselves off from people who contribute to our struggle. I'll tell a quick story. A couple of weeks ago, I did a book event at Towson, and there was this young white student who came to me after and said, this is like amazing. I've been reading this stuff since high school, and I just did not know that I could grow this much in such a short amount of time. I think they were a freshman or a sophomore. And I said, oh, you were reading this stuff at school? And they said, oh, God, no, we weren't reading this stuff at school. They wouldn't let us. But my mom teaches at a junior community college, and the students and staff there protested for there to be a diversity curriculum. And so they required all of the staff and instructors to go through this curriculum, and they made them take home a stack of books. And I was like, okay. And they said, well, I figure if they're making my mom read this stuff, then I probably should read this stuff too. And listen, this kid read, 8 or 10 books from New Jim Crow, Angela, all the stuff that's quite literally being banned. And I go, well, what did you learn? And he said, well, I learned that, it's probably a good chance that I've been racist, and that's okay, because there were also white people who were fighting to do the right thing. And I said, that's absolutely true. And what makes me so sad is that growing up, I was constantly introduced to heroic, revolutionary Black and brown figures in my conversations at home. My mom would talk about Angela Davis while she would braid my hair, right? So many people at school, we would have Black History Month posters on the wall. And so when I think about the dearth of what our school teaches, is not only banning our history, right? The student I met in Baltimore, they're preventing white people from learning about revolutionary white people. Isn't that a concern? Isn't that terrifying? It's not just our history, it's everyone's history, right? And so for so long, I'm like, wow, so young white kids, they only really get to learn about white people as being slave owners and bad or dangerously liberal like Abraham Lincoln, right? They don't get to learn about people like John Brown, or they don't get to learn that Helen Keller was a socialist and an anti-racist, right? It's like there's so many different, people don't get to learn about Grace Lee Boggs, you know, the Young Patriots. So the, Catherine Boudin, who went to prison for years as a part of a revolutionary struggle as part of the Weathermen. So there's like quite literally a robust, fascinating, important tradition. But when you're only told that your heroes are villains who are terrible, or heroes who uphold empire, then those become your options, right? And so I think that, no, we should expand as much as possible and teach about the diverse traditions and the diverse ancestors who make us possible, because we need to know that, you know, where do we go? Whose lines do we follow? It's the same with Jesus. I love when I heard pastors talk about revolutionary Jesus, because if you think your Jesus is only going to be upholding like whatever you wish, like he's a genie, well, no, right? That can't be the only thing that God says about, you know, Christ. But if we get to learn about God and Jesus is someone who turned over tables, who said, hey, you know, let he without sin cast the first stone. Right, I love that Jesus, because Jesus doesn't say, all right, go bring the man who was adulterous and we're going to stone him too. He doesn't do that. He says, you know, everyone drop your stone. Let's think about this. And so having as many traditions as possible and having a diverse range of ancestors, I think is so important. And that's why they want it to be banned, because they don't want people like that student, especially young white people like that student, to learn the full extent of what's possible. And so what do? They make it illegal. They make it illegal. And they say, you know, we don't want these people feeling bad. No. You don't want them feeling empowered. Because you could just teach other people. You don't want them feeling inspired. You don't want them to join social movements and say, oh, wow, this whole system is really wrong. Well, let's do something about it. And so I think it's tremendous cowardice, and we need people to resist the fascist bans on our education so people can continue to learn about all these diverse histories.
So I know that there are a couple questions, so let's take them at one time. The questions that we have, maybe three or so questions.
All right, so I got one right here.
In my church, a couple of people who I would have never suspected have quietly been arming themselves, learning how to use guns, which is something I never expected on the left. And famously, slavery was not ended with marches and protests, but rather with a bloody, bloody war. And so when you talked about fighting, and when our Reverend Sister yesterday invoked that we were in a war, how do you think about the very uncomfortable interplay between change and violence?
Wow, okay. So let that sit just a little bit, and we'll hear to give you time to gather some thoughts on that as Malou makes her way. Helms, your question.
I'd like for you to speak a little bit about the intersection between LGBTQ rights and abolition.
Okay, good. So LGBTQ plus rights and abolitionism. And abolitionism, as you know, I think as you all frame it, seems deeply intersectional. So more insight into that.
You said three, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, never mind. That question was going to be the same.
Oh, okay.
Anybody
So
else got
anyone?
one?
Any other question?
All right.
Derecka, could you repeat your very succinct definition of abolition? It was fabulous. I want to write it down. And I know I need to read the book, yes, but give me the sentence first so that I can chew on it.
All right. So we'll probably let that be the last word, right? So the question of you know, what time is it on the world clock? It seems like it's violent in the Civil War. So yeah, I mean, I don't know how you all would want to answer.
Are there any that are jumping off of you?
Yeah.
So in terms of the question of violence, I was pushed to first ask the question of what's the initial forms of violence? Well, what do we consider violence to be? We tend to think actually, we start telling the story of violence with people actually responding to violence. And so we start the story with the response to violence and not the initial systems of violence, systemic sins of capitalist exploitation, of environmental devastation, of white supremacy, of heteropatriarchy. We can name all of them. We'd be here all day. But the point is that those are the most insidious and the most impactful forms of violence in the world. That's why Dr. King said that the United States is the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. He didn't say the kids that were in Watts. He didn't say the kids that were in Atlanta. He didn't say the kids that were in Detroit. He said the United States is the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. So I guess my proposal is that the beginning of our conversation about violence doesn't start with what's actually responses to violence, but starts with the actual violence itself. Okay, so now we have the context. Not just black people, but oppressed people have responded to all systems of violence in a variety of different ways. And what happens, particularly with black struggle, is that it gets limited to a very narrow understanding of what black freedom struggles looks like, which is basically what Dr. King and them did in 1963 in August on the March on Washington. You see signs, you hear chants, there's nonviolent direct action. And so I think of revolutionaries like David Walker, who was a preacher, who was also an abolitionist who believed in armed struggle. And he believed in armed struggle on theological grounds. He said, not only should we resist slavery, but it's a sin if you don't resist slavery. Now, I'm not saying that everyone here should be David Walker, but I'm saying David Walker is a part of our wide tradition. So just thinking about the variety of different responses. I mean, I have practical questions about people arming themselves right now, but that's sort of maybe for another conversation. I don't know this particular context, but that's just sort of some of the ways that I tend to think about violence, and the names that we use, the language that we use becomes very important in how we even talk about the conversation.
And then to some of the, want to add to that, or to some of the questions on intersectionality and particularly around LGBTQ.
Yeah, I 100% agree with everything Niall said, and just want to emphasize the difference between peaceful and nonviolent direct action. Because one thing you'll hear thrown around is that, especially from our political leaders, is that, we support peaceful protests, but everyone else, if you're doing that stuff, it's messed up, you're quite literally, you're thugs, this is wrong. And nonviolent direct action is not the same as peaceful protest, right? It's disruptive. Like it can be uncomfortable. It's supposed to be exactly. And so we're seeing, when I say the criminalization of our dissent, it includes the criminalization of nonviolent direct action, which is uncomfortable. I think the broader question around the diversity of tactics, it just sort of depends which tradition your organization is a part of. And so I don't think about this as an individual solely responsible. So I don't think that me, Derecka, going to arm myself is contributing to a broader revolutionary struggle. I don't agree with that. What I do think that is that organizations should reckon with this question and have a theory of change around their relationship to peaceful actions, nonviolent direct action, and violent tactics, right? And I've seen from the United States to South Africa to Brazil, we've seen people engage in a range of tactics and resort to violence when they have been constantly attacked, right? And so I think that people have a right to defend themselves. If you're being constantly, you have a right to live. And so the organization that I'm a part of our theory of change is not to engage in violent tactics in the United States, primarily because, one, we're outgunned, we're out-droned, we're out-surveilled, like the times are different. And so I'm not prepared to die as a martyr in an armed struggle with the Dream Defenders right now. Like that is not my goal. Other people, that is their goal, right? And we should, either affirm, critique, whatever, be in a relationship with that. But I think this question is best answered through organizations and not just sort of as an individual tactic or response. I do believe and strongly promote nonviolent direct action. I think that Marta Russell, amazing disability rights writer, when she writes about people literally dragging their wheelchairs up the state capitol to say, hey, y'all need to pass this law. We're being exploited. It's like that kind of action, absolutely, 1,000% we need to do. Taking over streets, absolutely. Occupying buildings, absolutely. Yep. Setting buildings on fire, I don't like setting cops' buildings on fire personally. I don't know if I'm gonna be out the person with the match, but I will represent the person with the match in court. I think that's really, really important. Because then what happens? More people have gone to jail and prison for protesting police violence than police who've killed people.
That's exactly right.
Right? When this autopsy report came out, is it Tortuguita? 57 bullet holes to his body. Like, come on, right? So the question of violence must always start with the people who have the, quote, legitimate control over violence and how people are then responding to that violence. The question around the intersection, I don't love the word intersection, even though I know it's like a very important contribution to how we think about a lot of different things alongside each other. I think it's inherent to the abolitionist struggle. So for example, I remember when I was in college, I thought the primary, quote, LGBT issue was around gay marriage, right? And it wasn't until I started organizing with people of different backgrounds that I realized that actually one of the major crises is youth homelessness, facing people who come out to their parents and they are forced out of their homes and live in the streets, engaging in dangerous kinds of labor, because then when they try to go and get a job, they're discriminated against in the workplace. Right. And so what do you have? You have parents, you have police, and you have businesses all exploiting people because of who they love and how they identify, right? And so that is 1,000% issue inherent to abolition. Or when half of all black trans women report being incarcerated at some point in their life, half. Really? Right? And so when I think about those sorts of statistics, or why even people kill each other. And so in the last 4 to 5 years, there's been an increase in murders and homicides of people who are trans, especially trans women. Calling the police isn't going to reduce violence against trans people. Like, it's not. It will enhance it, absolutely, right? The police department that killed George Floyd, they have the reputation of being the most homophobic police department in the United States, right? And so when it then gets reduced to should cops march at Pride, it's like, no, Pride started as a riot because of police who raided Stonewall and those people resisted, right? And so if we want to reduce people being killed because of homophobia or transphobia, we have to reduce homophobia and transphobia. Increasing police to do that, which a lot of governors like to create task force to do we were talking about this in New York, trying to get people armed inside of churches to protect queer people. No, you're much more likely to be a victim of a gunshot from a cop or from a civilian if you're a person who's queer than not. And so I think it's absolutely inherent to our struggle. And ultimately, the question we should be asking is this going to save lives and help us thrive? Because again, calling 911 is not going to stop homophobia. Amen. It's not going to do that. Go look at some of these group texts that's been leaked from police chat groups and ask if having more carceral systems going to decrease why trans and queer people ultimately get killed, and it's not the solution. And so I think that we should do as much as we can. This is true for women too. I hear people say, oh, you don't care about survivors, you don't care about women, you don't care about children. Well, police have among the highest rates of domestic violence of any profession. What about the wives of police officers? What about their daughters? What about their partners? Right? And so we're going to rely on people who have the highest rates of domestic violence to come to my house and keep me safe? Right? After excessive force, the number 2 complaint against police is what? Sexual misconduct reported by who? Women and trans people and sex workers. Okay? So when I see, politicians, liberal, progressive, conservative politicians say we need to reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act, which does what? Pours millions of dollars into police. It's like, no, pour that money into universal daycare, pour that money into universal basic income, pour that money into universal child care, cancel student debt, do all these other things that women have been organizing around for decades to increase our agency instead of just, again, creating more jobs predicated upon our oppression, because that's ultimately what it does. And so, again, the reason I don't like intersection and intersectionality is not because I don't think the analysis is useful, but our struggles are intertwined and they're inherent to each other. Oh, and then the question around abolition. And so what I said earlier is that abolition is a political commitment to eradicate carceral, community, colonial, and capitalist violence at the same time, over time, as we're building up individuals, communities, institutions, and our planets to thrive.
We need to pause the conversation there for now, but we'll pick back up. I'm sure you all will pick back up. We'll pick back up in our afternoon session as we go deeper. But I just want you all to join me in thanking Niall and Derecka for bringing their expertise, their traditions, their imaginations to this space.